Welcome to Literary Music Series. My name's Natalie. I am the founder and artistic director. Tonight, we have a very special guest. This is pianist Llewellyn Sanchez-Werner.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Every week, you make donations to the Literary Music Series, which then go to the artist in that week's episode. This week, however, your donations will go to the NAACP's Legal Defense and Education Fund. The work they do is important. In their own words, through advocacy and litigation, LDF focuses on issues of education, voter protection, economic justice, and criminal justice. LDF pursues racial justice to move our nation toward a society that fulfills the promise of equality for all Americans. I encourage and urge you to donate generously. Furthermore, let me state this fundamental and unequivocal truth. Black lives matter.
Black Lives Matter. Yes. Yes, they do. The two of us are incredibly passionate about providing a channel and giving as much voice as we can to underrepresented artists in the field of classical music for both of us and in the field of poetry for me. And with that being said, we will turn it over now to Llewellyn, who will open our program tonight.
William Grant Still was a man of many firsts. He was the first Black American to conduct a major orchestra, the first Black American to conduct a performance of his own works, and the first Black American to conduct an orchestra in the Deep South. He was the first Black American to have an opera produced by a major opera company, and separately the first Black American to have an opera performed on national television. His Afro-American Symphony was the first symphony by a Black American composer to be performed by a major orchestra when it was premiered by the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra in 1931. William Grant Still used text from the poems of Black American poet Paul Laurence Dunbar as inscriptions for each of the four movements. William Grant Still studied with George Chadwick, who was one of the Boston Six, the generation of American composers right before Charles Ives, and he also studied with French-American Edgar Varese. While living in Harlem, he worked closely with Langston Hughes, County Collin, Alan Locke, and other figures of the Harlem Renaissance. And I would like to play for you now his Summerland, the second piece from his set entitled Three Visions.
June Jordan is highly acclaimed and widely regarded as one of the greatest Jamaican American writers of her generation. She was born in 1936 in Harlem, New York, and had a difficult childhood and relationship with her parents. They did not support her pursuit of writing. Nevertheless, she persisted and made an astounding name for herself. She went on to teach at Yale University, at UC Berkeley, at Stony Brook, and received a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts. She received a Rockefeller Foundation grant, and she won the National Association of Black Journalists Award. Her work engages some of the most relevant and fundamental struggles of her era, including women's rights, civil rights, and sexual freedom. Her writing speaks on themes of bisexuality, of which she was, family, political oppression, racial identity, racial inequality, and memory. Tonight, I will be reading for you a poem of hers entitled Poem for My Love. How do we come to be here next to each other in the night? Where are the stars that show us to our love inevitable? Outside the leaves flame usual in darkness, and the rain falls cool and blessed on the holy flesh, the black men waiting on the corner for a womanly mirage. I am amazed by peace. It is this possibility of you asleep and breathing in the quiet air.
Long before the golden generation of American classical musicians in the 20th century, and even before the Civil War, Louis Moreau Gottschalk was one of the very first American pianists and composers of renown. Born in New Orleans to an Ashkenazi Jewish father from London and a French Creole mother with ancestry from Haiti, his life spanned the early to mid-1800s. Chopin was quoted as saying to a 15-year-old Gottschalk, "Give me your hand, my child. I predict that you will become the king of pianists." Gottschalk even attracted the attention of Liszt and Alcon, and after traveling extensively to perform in Europe and Latin America, he eventually became known as one of the most highly regarded pianists in the New World in that era. Among his very few students was the great Venezuelan pianist Teresa Carreño, who 1 year later even performed for Abraham Lincoln. I would like to perform for you one of Gottschalk's compositions, The Banjo, written in 1853. This piece incorporates the melody from Stephen Foster's Camptown Races and evokes on the piano the up-picking and downstroking of a banjo with a style of variations that resembles music from the Senegambia region of West Africa. Here is Louis Moreau Gottschalk's The Banjo.
Henry Dumas was a fiction writer and a poet. He was born in 1934 in Sweet Home, Arkansas, and he moved to Harlem, New York with his family when he was 10 years old. He attended City College of New York and Rutgers University, and in between his time at these two institutions, he joined the Air Force and was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, and the Arabian Peninsula. He worked for IBM for a brief period of time, and then he left and began teaching at Southern Illinois University, where he led language workshops. He was a very active member of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement, and at 33 years old in 1968, he was shot and killed by a New York City police officer in a case of mistaken identity. His work, thanks to a colleague of his at Southern Illinois University, became posthumously available through collections of his poetry, and his writing is influenced in great part by African American history, jazz, gospel music, Christianity, elements of the supernatural, and Arabian culture, which came from his time on the Arabian Peninsula. I will be reading for you a poem entitled Love Song by Henry Dumas. Beloved, I have to adore the earth. The wind must have heard your voice once. It echoes and sings like you. The soil must have tasted you once. It is laden with your scent. The trees honor you in gold and blush when you pass. I know why the North Country is frozen. It has been trying to preserve your memory. I know why the desert burns with fever. It was wept too long without you. On hands and knees, the ocean begs up the beach and falls at your feet. I have to adore the mirror of the earth. You have taught her well how to be beautiful.
Florence Price was a woman of many firsts. She was the first Black American woman to have a symphony performed by a major orchestra, when her first symphony was performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 1932. That symphony won first prize in the Rodman Wanamaker competition. And since Wanamaker's store in Philadelphia housed the largest fully functioning pipe organ in the world, it seems fitting that Florence Price won the Wanamaker Prize because she was also an incredible organist, and it was an organ that she received her artist diploma in Boston. She studied with George Chadwick and returned home to Little Rock after her studies in Boston, but after a series of racial incidents, including one particular lynching of a Black man in 1927 that had a painfully lasting effect on her, her whole family decided to move up north. And they joined many Black families escaping Jim Crow conditions in the South by moving north during the Great Migration, in their case to Chicago. It was in Chicago that her career really began to take off, and while there she made notable friendships with really prominent figures, Langston, Hughes, and contralto Marian Anderson. Now, Florence Price's music features a wonderful mix of blues melodies, idioms stemming from her southern roots, European romantic techniques, and sacred music of the African American church. And I highly, highly recommend her third symphony, which is truly an astounding compositional achievement. Now I would like to play for you two short pieces by Florence Price, The Goblin and the Mosquito, and Tickling Toes.
Yusef Komunyakaa, who is regarded as one of the greatest living poets, was born in Louisiana in 1947. He's the son of a carpenter. He said himself that he was first shown the power of language through his grandparents, who were church people. In his own words, he says, "The sound of the Old Testament informed the cadences of their speech. It was my first introduction to poetry." He served in the Vietnam War as a correspondent, and he was managing editor of the Southern Cross during the war, for which he received a Bronze Star. He earned a Bachelor of Arts from University of Colorado Springs on the GI Bill. He earned a Master of Arts from Colorado State University and a Master of Fine Arts from UC Irvine. In his work, he weaves together vernacular language, jazz rhythms, and deeply personal narrative to create these really beautiful and complex and intricate images of life in both peacetime and wartime. His themes range from Black experience in the rural South to the Civil Rights era, and of depictions of his time as a soldier during the Vietnam War. And his work is greatly autobiographical. He was awarded the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award and the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. He also received the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize and the Louisiana Writer Award for his enduring contribution to the poetry world. And this is just a list of a few of his many accolades. I will be reading for you a poem by Yusef Komunyakaa entitled "We Never Know." He danced with the tall grass for a moment, like he was swaying with a woman. Our gun barrels glowed white hot. When I got to him, a blue halo of flies had already claimed him. I pulled the crumbled photograph from his fingers. There's no other way to say this. I fell in love. The morning cleared again, except for a distant mortar and somewhere choppers taking off. I slid the wallet into his pocket and turned him over so he wouldn't be kissing the ground.
Surely you know Art Tatum as one of the great jazz pianists and virtuosi. He was completely blind in one eye, nearly blind in the other. But as incredible as his pianistic career was, knowing that fact, anyone hearing him play would consider him a legendary pianist, even if they didn't know about his blindness. He also had an incredible encyclopedic memory, and as a baseball fan myself, I enjoyed discovering that his remarkable memory even applied to a formidable mental database of baseball statistics. There's a story that Vladimir Horowitz heard about the great Tatum and went out to a nightclub one night to catch one of his performances. When Horowitz left the club that night after hearing Tatum, he turned to a friend and said, if he took up classical music seriously, I'd quit my job the next day. Here is a transcription of Art Tatum improvising in 1949 on Irving Berlin's classic melody, Blue Skies.
Nikki Giovanni is one of America's foremost poets today. On her website, she wrote a biography for herself. And I will read that to you now. I will read the last paragraph of it. So this is Nikki Giovanni on herself in her own words. I was asked to do a biography, so this is it. I am 71 years old. I highly recommend Old Age. It's fun. I have been awarded an unprecedented 7 NAACP Image Awards, which makes me very, very proud. I have been nominated for a Grammy, been a finalist for the National Book Award. I am very proud to have authored 3 New York Times and Los Angeles Times bestsellers, highly unusual for a poet. I am a university distinguished professor at Virginia Tech. I don't have a lot of friends, but I have good ones. I have a son and a granddaughter. My father, mother, sister, and middle aunt are all deceased, literally making me go from being the baby in the family to being an elder. I like to cook, travel, and dream. I'm a writer. I'm happy. And this is Nikki Giovanni's poem entitled Walking Down Park. Walking down Park, Amsterdam or Columbus. Do you ever stop to think what it looked like before it was an avenue? Did you ever stop to think what you walked before you rode subways to the stock exchange? We can't be on the stock exchange. We are the stock exchanged. Did you ever maybe wonder what grass was like before they rolled it into a ball and called it Central Park? Or syphilitic dogs and their 2-legged tubercular masters fertilized the corners and sidewalks? Ever want to know what would happen if your life could be fertilized by a love thought, by a loved one who loves you? Ever look south on a clear day and not see Times Square, but see tall birch trees with sycamores touching hands and see gazelles running playfully after the lions? Ever hear the antelope bark from the 3rd floor apartment? Did you ever sit down and wonder about what freedom's freedom would bring? It's so easy to be free. You start by loving yourself, then those who look like you. All else will come naturally. Ever wonder why so much asphalt was laid in so little space? Probably so we would forget the Iroquois, Algonquin, and Mohicans who could caress the earth. Ever think what Harlem would be like if our herbs and roots and elephant ears grew, sending a cacophony of sound to us? The parrot parroting, black is beautiful, black is beautiful. Owls sending whoos, making love. And me and you, just sitting in the sun, trying to find a way to get a banana tree from one of the monkeys. Koala bears sitting in the trees laughing at our listlessness. Ever think it's possible for us to be happy?
Duke Ellington was one of the finest jazz orchestra leaders, composers, pianists, and all-around musicians America has produced. In his early years, he was a staple at New York's Cotton Club, a prominent uptown venue. Yet even when other clubs in New York, especially those downtown, allowed black and white patrons to intermingle, the Cotton Club was still wrought with racial injustice. Black patrons sat in the back third, behind columns and partitions, and black performers, including Duke himself, had to enter through the service entrance, even if they were that evening's performers. Naturally, Ellington became committed to social activism and to promoting racial equality through musical storytelling. For his Jump for Joy, a 1941 composition which boldly defied racial stereotypes that were commonly held and challenged segregation, he received film offers from Charlie Chaplin and Orson Welles. One of his seminal works, Black, Brown, and Beige, was written with the same goal. It was composed in 1943 for for one of Ellington's numerous annual concerts at Carnegie Hall, and it functioned as a sonorous narration of the struggles and triumphs in historical and contemporary Black culture. He himself introduced the work as, quote, a tone parallel to the history of the Negro in America, unquote. The first movement was entitled Black, and it features spirituals and elicits imagery of the trials of the first slaves to travel to the New World. The second movement, entitled Brown, presented scenes of West Indian dances, a celebration of emancipation, and even a section dedicated to the blues. The final movement, entitled Beige, depicts the Black American from the Roaring Twenties all the way through World War II. Come Sunday, which I will play for you now, is the spiritual that he wrote as part of Black.
As we close our program tonight, I would like to share with you a poem by one of my all-time favorite poets. His name's Langston Hughes. He was and still is one of the most towering figures in poetic and literary history, and is a household name, and for good reason. He was a central figure in the Harlem Renaissance, which was a blossoming of Black intellectual, artistic, and literary life that took place in the 1920s. And he sought to honestly portray the hardships and the joys of working class Black life. And in doing so, he avoided stereotypes, he avoided sentimental idealization. He simply told the truth. He won many awards in his lifetime. At the start of his career, early on, he won a Guggenheim Fellowship, which allowed him to travel to Spain and Russia. He won the Ainsfield-Wolf Book Award. He was awarded by the NAACP the Spingarn Medal for distinguished achievements by an African American. And he received an award from the National Institute of Arts and Letters. He was an active member in the civil rights movement, and as the movement was gaining traction, he actually wrote an in-depth weekly column in a leading Black newspaper entitled The Chicago Defender. So, by this legend of a poet, I want to read you this beautiful poem of his to end our night tonight together. It's entitled Dreams. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Thank you for joining us tonight on the 5th installment of Literary Music Series. As we said at the opening of the program, we are asking for donations to the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. We will see you next week. Thank you.